Sunrise Haven hung in the lavender shadow of a gas giant, its ring turning slowly, its windows catching thin fans of starlight. On approach, it looked fragile, a narrow band of glittering metal and glass, but anyone who knew its residents might have used a different word. Inside, morning unfolded with the practiced rhythm of a place full of people who had seen too many mornings to waste them. In a workshop wedged between a hydroponics bay and a viewing lounge, Agnieszka Kowal had a maintenance drone in pieces on the table. Wires fanned out like seaweed, tiny capacitors in labeled trays. She hummed tunelessly as she soldered a bypass line. The drone's original function was boring, inspection of external trusses. Agnieszka was improving it. She had spent decades in resistance cells, making do with parts that never quite fit, and retirement had not dulled the urge to tinker. She flicked a wrist, and a holoscreen rose from the tabletop, showing a schematic of Sunrise Haven. She did not look like someone most officers would ask for tactical advice. Her hair was bound in a simple coil, her sweater was fraying at one elbow, and her slippers had cartoon moons on them. Yet her personal set of schematics was more detailed than anything in official archives. Every maintenance hatch, every undocumented cable someone had jammed into a junction during an emergency, every weld she thought looked untrustworthy, she annotated and updated. Bits of memory surfaced as she worked. A pressure door that had failed under bombardment years ago. A power coupling that had run too hot on a stealth vessel she had helped build. Her fingers always knew where the weak points would be. A proximity chime sounded softly. She ignored it for the moment. On the ring outside, someone's morning would be slightly less convenient until she restored this drone's motor control. Good. People needed small annoyances to stay sharp. In the Central Commons, Mabel Okoro presided over breakfast, with the practiced attention of someone who had once balanced ammunition shipments across 3 battlefronts. The long curved room was half cafeteria, half park, its inner window showing the gas giant's swirling banded clouds. "Orange slices on that tray, not with the hot dishes," she directed a younger staffer, nodding to the line of plates. "Moisture content fogs the warmers. We went through this last week." Her cane rested against a table. She did not need it all the time, but it helped people underestimate her. On the small screen of her personal pad, she had up a logistics grid. Oxygen consumption, water filtration throughput, pharmaceutical stock, and because she cared about morale as much as survival coffee beans remaining, Mabel's memory for inventory was ferocious. She had once halted a cargo strike by reciting, from memory, the exact tonnage of perishable fruits that would spoil if the blockade held for 3 more days. She knew precisely how many oxygen candles sat dusty in a forgotten locker on Deck C because she had quietly moved them there herself. She watched the crowd. Retired Marines, engineers, hull techs, medics, their shirts decorated with old unit patches and personal slogans. Some moved easily, some with care. Many carried themselves like they were constantly walking down a ramp into unknown territory, assessing who might need help. At a central table, a cluster of residents played cards. On a lower deck walkway that doubled as a running track, Yelena Duarte marched in a steady rhythm, hands clasped behind her back, eyes scanning bulkheads and ceiling fixtures. Yelena insisted she was just getting her steps in. The truth was simpler and more complicated. She did not know how to be anywhere without automatically mapping its defenses. Years of leading boarding teams had etched the habit deep. She saw choke points instead of corridors, angles of fire instead of decorative panels. Behind her, a young Marine in fresh-pressed duty blacks tried to keep up. Jonah Rangan had pulled station liaison duty, which he had expected to be little more than escorting visitors and nodding through safety drills. Instead, he found himself being educated. "You don't stand there," Yelena told him as he paused beside an intersection. "Ma'am?" She jabbed a finger at a seemingly innocuous spot where the overhead curved. "Sightline from anyone coming from that direction. Door control panels on your wrong side. If someone charges, you take 2 steps left." She moved to demonstrate, "and you have cover from this support strut. You want options, not open floor." Jonah glanced up. The panel looked like every other one on the ring. He hadn't noticed the way the strut broke lines of fire until she pointed it out. "Yes, ma'am," he said. And then, because she always corrected him when he used that word, added, Yelena. She grunted approval and resumed walking, her mind already sliding into a different path, recalculating a different set of approaches. In the station's small security center, Chief Gurinder Al-Taleb watched camera feeds and muttered under his breath. He was not much older than Jonah, but among the retirees, he felt like an apprentice, carpenter among a hall of old masters. Every time he thought he knew the station, one of the residents casually revealed some forgotten passage or maintenance bypass. It offended his professional sense and reassured his deeper instincts at the same time. If anything truly bad ever happened, he suspected the official emergency manual would be less useful than asking the elders what they remembered from that time in the asteroid riots or the siege on that drift station that never made the news. He scanned through sectors. Everything looked quiet. The outer belt corridor had seen a cluster of raids in recent months, but none this close to the Lumen Gate since the Coalition had bolstered patrols. Gurinder took a long drink of coffee and checked the time, a little before 09 a.m. He was already thinking about lunch rotations, about where to deploy his small security team so the vulnerable could move without worry. In the smaller of the station's data centers, Hilda Matsuo sat with her eyes closed, listening to the hum of processors and cooling fans. Modern people thought networks sounded the same everywhere. She knew better. Patterns in the hum told her how the load shifted. Tiny fluctuations told her which subsystems had routines she mistrusted. She had helped write the Coalition's first secure protocols, and she remained convinced that the only truly safe system was one that could be unplugged, turned off, and reconnected manually. Her hands worked at a physical keyboard. She was updating a set of offline keys, air-gapped from the main systems. The station's manager had humored her with this little luxury. A relic, some called it. Hilda thought of it as a fire extinguisher. Somewhere beyond the gas giant's limb, beyond the neat traffic lanes stretching toward Caldera's spindle and the cold gleam of the Lumen Gate, a pirate frigate coasted in silence. Razorwind was a dark tooth against the stars, its hull patched from innumerable skirmishes, its profile modified so many times even Kraghul fleet databases held conflicting schematics. Within, in a command blister walled with rugged displays, Captain Karzo Rex stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His scales caught the color of distant lightning from the gas giant storm, green-edged with a metallic sheen. Like all Kraghul raised in the Marauders' culture, he had grown up on tales of easy prey and rich ransoms. Target station confirmed. Sunrise Haven. His second officer reported, clicking mandibles as data scrolled past. Minimal weapon systems. Life signs, medium density. Age distribution, heavily skewed to late life stages. Security detail, nominal. Karzo's nictitating membranes flicked in lazy amusement. Soft fruit, he said. They send their old heroes there, do they not? A sentimental trophy ring. That is what the intercepted traffic indicates, the second officer replied. Behind them, in a recessed engineering alcove, a non-Kraghul tech hunched over a panel, adjusting power distributions. Seraq Jin kept his expression blank, his smooth taupe skin, furless except for a crest of pale hair, did not ripple the way Kraghul's scales did, but his inner tension was no less real. He had been taken on a border world and given a choice, work for the Marauders or decorate a pike. Seraq hated them, but the universe did not reward clean hatred with clean options. He studied the projected image of Sunrise Haven, the ring's subtle rotation, the tidy heat signature, the civilian beacon broadcasting welcome messages. He had been on enough raids to know that desperate targets fought hardest. Old soldiers with nothing left to fear? That thought scratched at him like grit under a contact lens. He suppressed it. His survival depended on making Razorwind useful. Karzo snapped his claws together. "Bring us in, under EM silence," he ordered. "Spoof a low-mass ore barge if someone stares too long. Once we close to boarding range, deploy pods along the arc here, here, and here." He tapped Sunrise Haven's schematic, where the outer ring met the spoke-like docks. "We make a show of force, target the staff, gather hostages. The old ones will be docile. They always are. Once you show them you control their air." Razorwind's helm officer rippled assent. Course corrections ticked silently in the navigation buffer. Engines whispered to life. On Caldera's spindle, a larger station that bristled with antennae and command modules, Admiral Rafiq Ben Yunus stood in a glass-walled operations room, watching transit paths around the Lumen Gate. The gate's ancient segments hung like an unfinished halo around a pocket of warping light. "We keep getting little anomalies in the outer belt corridor," a staffer said, adjusting a projection. "Mass readings that don't match registered vessels. Could be sensor ghosts. Could be stealth plates. We don't have enough pickets to chase every shadow." Rafiq's beard was shot through with silver, his posture still straight, despite long months of stand-up shifts. Stone-faced in briefings, he laughed easily off duty, but today, tension gathered behind his eyes. The Kraghul Marauders had been uncharacteristically focused, their raids probing around the Lumen Gate without fully committing. "Post a note," he said. "If we see repetition in the same volume within—" He glanced at a rolling time chart. "Within 3 days, we dispatch a scout corvette. Until then, flag it, but don't panic." At the far end of the table, Director Tamsin Calderas folded her hands, her suit immaculate, her expression cool. "We do not redirect core assets for every flicker," she said. "The Lumen Gate's continuity metrics are clear. Disruptions now would set back the Osari Compact's timetable by months." She represented the civilian side of the Terran Outreach Union in this sector, and to her the gate was both a miracle and a ledger entry. Every day it stayed open, trade flowed. Every day it hiccuped, nervy investors whispered about instability. Rafiq resisted the urge to argue further. He knew when the political calculus would outweigh tactical prudence. He also knew, with a stubbornness that had carried him through years of service, that something in his gut told him trouble was coming from the quiet edges. He made a small note in his private log, tagging the anomalies and adding a simple phrase: "If it goes wrong out there, we are hours too far away." On a Vera diplomatic craft docked nearby, a being composed of braided stalks and unfolding leaves watched the same projection. Ambassador Thaluan's photosynthetic tissues shifted hue with concern. Humans claimed intuition often, Thaluan mused. For their species, it had proven less superstition and more a pattern of quickly integrated experience. When one of their seasoned commanders grew uneasy, Thaluan did not dismiss it. Unfortunately, the coalition of free orbits operated on consensus. Consensus moved slowly. By the time Razorwind slipped into the shadow of the gas giant, Sunrise Haven's residents had moved on from breakfast. In the workshop, Agnieszka reassembled her drone and sent it onto the maintenance rail. It zipped off to inspect external conduits along a curve labeled Sector 6C. She watched its feed for a moment, checking for jitter in the images, and caught something wrong. A faint distortion crossed the starfield. Then another, not the regular bright streaks of registered craft. These were blotches, shadows, where no mass reading was logged in the civilian system. She sat up a little straighter, thumbed a control, and cross-checked with an old, personal script she had written that analyzed sensor noise patterns instead of clean returns. Automation systems discarded noise. Agnieszka listened to it. 2 dark forms resolved, shapes that reflected little, radiated very little heat, and crept in on a curve that would bring them close beneath the station's belly. She felt her heart rate rise. She did not panic. She had been under shelling, had heard buildings groan and fall around her. Compared to those days, the workshop was outrageously safe and well lit. "Aggie to Chief Gurinder," she said into the intercom. "You looking at maintenance drone feed 6C?" Gurinder's voice came back after a breath, tinged with the effort of catching up. "I am now. What am I seeing? A bad idea coming to visit. 2 of them, but I'd wager more beyond sensor edge. Their emission profile looks like someone worked hard to hide it. I'd call it a ship on quiet approach. Or ships." Gurinder swore softly, flipped to radar overlays. "I'm not seeing transponder IDs." "Of course you're not," Agnieszka replied. "The only people who try to be invisible are friends you haven't met yet, or enemies trying to surprise you. And this doesn't feel like a social call. Do you want me to wake people up?" In the security center, Gurinder's training clicked in. He pulled up emergency protocols, then glanced at the roster of who was on duty, where his tiny team was. Then his eyes slid, almost involuntarily, to a different list. Retired personnel with combat experience. He did not have authority to conscript residents. He did have authority to keep them alive. Alert status at level 1, he told the station systems. Lock down docking arms. Prep internal bulkheads for potential seal. And, absolutely yes, Aggie, wake people up. The gentle chime that rolled around Sunrise Haven was not a full klaxon. It was a tone meant to wake, not to frighten, followed by the station manager's voice. Attention all residents and staff. We are experiencing an unscheduled contact outside the standard traffic lanes. This is not a drill. Please move to your designated safe areas as posted. Security personnel will guide you. Mabel heard it in the commons as she supervised cleanup. She tapped her cane twice on the floor to gather attention. You all heard that, she said, projecting over the lingering breakfast talk. If you do not know your current safe area, you come to me or to Jonah here, and we will put you where you're meant to be. Her mind spun through maps. She knew the designated safe rooms. She also knew which ones had too few exits, which corridors bottlenecked, where blast doors would fall. She caught Jonah's gaze. He looked eager, a little uncertain, one hand straying toward the sidearm at his hip. Jonah, she said, you remember Drill Path B? Of course. We are not using it. He blinked. Ma, Mabel, trust me. You and I are going to walk the ring and tell people something different. He hesitated for only a heartbeat before nodding. There was something in Mabel's tone that brooked no argument, not even from people with actual rank. On the walking track, Yelena stopped mid-stride, listened to the chime, and smiled without humor. Always when my joints feel good, she muttered. Then she turned on her heel and started for the armory that was nominally only for station security. In the data center, Hilda saw the same alert and reached for a drawer she had not opened in months. Inside lay a portable deck she had customized herself. It had no wireless module. Every connection required a physical cable. Time to see if I was just being nostalgic, she said under her breath, even though she knew she never was. Outside, Razorwind dropped its final veil of stealth. 3 small boarding pods detached, coasting ahead under minimal power, each a stubby cylinder lined with shaped charges at its nose. Behind them, Razorwind's jammers came online, washing the local spectrum with a fuzz of false signals that made civilian boards stutter. Carzo watched the data. Sunrise Haven's faint defensive fields came up, too little and too late to turn away the pods. The ring's orientation shifted slightly. They've noticed, he said. Good. Fear keeps them compliant. Seraq checked his console. Jamming patterns were within expected parameters. The station's main comms to the outside were effectively cut, reduced to local tight beam lines that could not reach across the volume Razorwind occupied. He wondered what it would be like to be inside Sunrise Haven now. He imagined elderly civilians shuffling toward sealed rooms, guided by nervous staff. He tried not to think about the fact that his code would help keep them from calling for help in time. Then he thought, if they were anything like the elders he had known back home before the raid, they would not be shuffling. They would be organizing. He kept his face expressionless. The boarding pods hit Sunrise Haven with a series of deep thuds, one on an outer corridor near Sector 4B, another near a cargo junction at 7D, and a third directly adjacent to an airlock cluster by the main docking spoke. Shaped charges blew fast, cutting ragged holes, inward-facing blast panels slamming down a microsecond later to keep decompression localized. Kraghul breaching doctrine had been tested on dozens of weakly defended sites. Bulkheads buckled. Atmosphere howled. Then emergency doors slammed down as Sunrise Haven's internal systems responded. At the first breach, armored Kraghul and their mixed boarding team poured through, rifles raised. They expected civilians, maybe a panicked security guard or two. They did not expect the fire suppression system to erupt in their faces. Agnieszka had reached the environmental subsystem console just in time to override failsafes. Foam and mist blasted sideways instead of down, filling the corridor in a thick, clinging cloud that turned sensors into stumbling liars. Inside the fog, a small drone she had modified zipped forward, pinging distances, painting silhouettes of invaders on a private display she had routed to Yelena's wrist unit. Yelena, crouched behind a support strut with 3 other residents, and Jonah squinted at the tiny projected schematic. 2 squads, she murmured. Point team is maybe 6 bodies. Heavy's behind. Watch for the one with the bulkier heat signature. That will be their shield carrier. Jonah swallowed, gripping his weapon. These are retirees, he thought, glancing at the others. One had an old mineworker's vest with reflective stripes. Another had a faded field medic armband. Their eyes were intent, not frightened. Yelena tapped her cane. Today she had brought the one that contained a telescoping baton. On my mark, she said. 3, 2, 1. They moved, not toward the threat, but around it. Yelena had memorized this sector's floor plate years ago for no official reason. She knew that the overhead rails that carried service pods could also carry more weight if seized and locked. As the Kraghul pushed forward through foam and flickering alarm lights, the retirees triggered a pre-threaded cable from above. Metal hissed down, sweeping a loop across the corridor at thigh height. 2 Kraghul in front, surprised, went down, legs yanked out. Others tripped over them. In the confusion, Yelena's group surged in, targeting weapons first. Powered chairs, ordnance, and personal initiative converged. One resident piloted his motorized chair straight into a Kraghul's shins with bone-jarring impact, then jammed the chair's lift function to pitch the alien off balance. Jonah, training, finally finding firm ground, fired controlled shots at exposed joints. His rounds pinged off scales and armor, but he aimed where Yelena had drilled him earlier. Neck gaps, eye ridges. In fewer heartbeats than the pirates expected, they were disarmed and pinned, their weapons kicked away and slid into side rooms by residents who moved with a speed that belied their years. At the second breach near the cargo junction, Mabel had preempted the standard evacuation route. She knew that the posted safe room for this sector was down a straight corridor with limited cover. She also knew that if pirates came in, they would sweep that corridor first. So instead, she redirected people. You, love, you take your sister through the laundry access, she told a flustered attendant, pointing toward a service hatch. There's a ladder. You go up 1 deck and then over 3 doors. Follow the purple stripe. It will smell like bleach. It is safer there. But the safe room is unsafe today, Mabel said. Trust me. I used to write the manuals when we still thought straight lines were smart. She sent others through storage cubbies, a maintenance crawl space, even into a disused cinema where seat rows provided cover and the projection booth was an elevated vantage point. When the Kraghul team blasted into the designated safe room, they found it nearly empty. 2 residents in plain clothing sat on benches, hands folded. They looked too calm. The pirate squad leader, a scarred Kraghul with a cybernetic jaw hinge, advanced cautiously, weapon raised. On your feet, he snapped in trade. You come with us. One of the elders tilted her head. Are you here to take us away? She asked. Yes, he snapped again, stepping closer. Good. She dropped her hands. The detonator in her palm clicked. Elsewhere, Mabel saw the small icon on her pad that indicated a charge had gone off. The blast in the safe room was not large enough to breach hull. Agnieszka had carefully calculated explosive yield. It was enough to drop the room's overhead, dumping 30 centimeters of composite onto the invaders and filling the chamber with dust and confusion. Godspeed, Lotta, Mabel whispered, knowing the woman who had volunteered for that role had done so with clear eyes. Some of the residents still carried private burdens from old wars and did not want to die in bed. On the 3rd breach by the main docking spoke, Gurinder himself led a mixed team of his security officers and residents. He had initially tried to insist that only staff handle the front, but the moment he saw Yelena's expression when he issued that order, he reconsidered. You will be killed, he had said. She had replied simply, so will you if we leave this to you alone, and walked toward the breach site. He had remembered the list of names on her personnel file. She had led boarding actions in ships that now existed only as bent metal at the bottom of gravity wells. He had stepped aside, not because of rank, but because of competence. Now, as autoguns rattled overhead, firing suppressive bursts along the spoke, Gurinder watched Yelena move. She flowed from cover to cover, every motion considered. Behind her, a cluster of residents in powered exoskeletons repurposed from rehabilitation frames advanced like armored turtles. The pirates had expected to own the station within minutes. Instead, they encountered resistance at every turn. Fire doors that should have been opened slammed shut just as they rounded corners. Stairs they planned to descend turned out to be blocked by heavy carts that someone had forgotten to move. In the chaos, one of the Kraghul boarding officers signaled back to Razorwind. "Station resistance is heavier than predicted," he hissed over a tight beam. "Security personnel appear. Older, but tactics are disciplined. We have lost 2 squads' mobility." On Razorwind's bridge, Karzo's scales prickled. "How many security?" he demanded. "Unknown. They disguise themselves among civilians." The phrase sank through Karzo's initial contempt, like acid through old armor. He replayed the report. Older. Disciplined. So these are not simply old farmers and clerks, he thought. They put their veterans here. His jaw flexed. "Send heavy suppression," he growled. "Borrowers, drones, gas. I want them down before they improvise further." But improvisation had already reached a different theater. While Yelena and Gurinder contested the third breach, Agnieszka slid into a seat at an auxiliary control console she had repurposed long ago. Hilda's offline deck sat beside it, wired into critical systems. "Talk to me, Hilda," Agnieszka said. "What do we have?" Hilda's fingers danced. "They brought their own comm suppressors," she said. "Our long-range broadcasts are mush beyond the immediate vicinity, but their jamming is not perfect. See this?" She pointed at a jagged band on a spectrum analysis. "They left a gutter here. I can write it with analog tones. You think someone's listening? I think someone should be. But that is a problem for them. Our problem now is more local. Can you isolate the docking clamps?" Agnieszka's eyes narrowed. She pulled up the docking architecture. Razorwind had latched onto the main, spoke with magnetic grapples, strong as a hug from a panicked relative. The clamps were designed to release from either side in emergencies. But if she could convince the station's emergency system that Razorwind itself was a hazard, she could force the clamps to obey only station-side commands. "Give me 30 seconds, she said. Hilda smiled despite herself. "I will pretend to be surprised if it takes you that long." In the corridor battles, seconds leaked like air. Mabel directed residents down alternate routes, her senses extended by old intuition. She could almost feel where the pirates would go next. They trained on crimes, not on campaigns, she thought. They think in straight lines and quick grabs. They've never had to hold ground they took. That's where we've lived most of our lives. She caught Jonah's voice over a local channel, crisp and focused, calling out positions and status. Good. The young ones were rising to the occasion. At 9:23 a.m., Agnieszka made Razorwind a problem. She injected a series of sensor readings into the docking system's emergency logic. Localized overheating of hull connectors, microfissuring at the contact points, ions spraying from imagined stress fractures. Sunrise Haven's maintenance routines would usually downplay such flags. She had rewritten a tiny part of that hierarchy a year earlier, under the justification of wanting the station to be more careful. It had seemed excessive then. Now, it paid off. An alarm chimed in Razorwind's control grid. Docking clamps reporting anomaly. A console flashed. Integrity compromised. Recommend release sequence. Karzo, focused on the boarding feeds, flicked a hand impatiently. "Override it," he snapped. "We are not leaving." Seraq glanced at the underlying data and winced. He recognized the signatures. They looked like the kinds of errors that would cascade into explosive decompression if ignored. This could be genuine, he thought. Or it could be someone up there using the same tricks I would use. He obeyed, inputting override codes. For a moment, his panel said, "Command accepted." Then it flashed, "Denied by station authority." Agnieszka grinned. "That's right," she murmured. "You're a guest in my house now." She rerouted manual releases to a local console on Sunrise Haven's side and locked out Razorwind's roar of digital protests behind a firewall Hilda threw up. Razorwind tried again. The clamps refused. In frustration, Karzo ordered power to the boarding tubes maxed, trying to force wider access. On Sunrise Haven, this manifested as a shudder through the docking hub, ceiling panels rattling. Yelena, braced behind temporary cover, felt the vibration and understood it instantly. They're getting nervous, she thought. Good. She signaled Jonah and 2 residents with her to shift position. Change of plan, she said. We're not just holding them. We're going to take their ladder away. Jonah blinked. You want to go onto their ship? Do you think that thing is safer in their hands or ours? She shot back. He had no good answer. He nodded. Under Yelena's direction, they used a narrow service umbilical that reached from a maintenance closet into the docking interface. The pirates had not bothered to weld it shut. They had assumed no one on the station would be crazy enough to crawl through a half-meter tube while firefights rattled its walls. They had not met Yelena when they made that assumption. She led the way, baton clipped to her back, rifle slung awkwardly. The umbilical's metal was cold under her hands. Her breathing echoed, reminding her of similar crawls in other ships, other lifetimes. Beside her, Jonah fought a surge of claustrophobia. He kept moving because stopping felt worse. At the far end, a small hatch led into Razorwind's auxiliary docking vestibule. It was unattended. All eyes and weapons were pointed into Sunrise Haven, not at a narrow connector behind them. Yelena eased the hatch open a crack. No alarm shrieked. She slid through, then hauled Jonah after her. Razorwind's corridors smelled of oil, unwashed crew, and the sharp tang of exotic fuels. The lighting strips were dimmer than on Sunrise Haven, the angles sharper. Yelena checked her wrist display. Agnieszka's drone, still clinging to the exterior, fed a rough map of heat sources. Most of the crew were occupied either at consoles or in the boarding flows. This is their chance, she thought. Get to the throat. Seize the brain. They moved. Quiet and quick. Past a storage bay where sealed crates rattled with the vibration of systems pushed hard. In one alcove, they surprised a lone Kraghul tech who spun an alarm and froze with a stun baton leveled at his chest. Drop it, Jonah said. Weapon up. The tech glanced at Yelena. Her eyes were flat and steady. He saw no hesitation about what she would do if he refused. His clawed hand opened. The baton clattered to the deck. Yelena motioned him into a corner and sealed him in with a maintenance barrier. Later, she told Jonah, we don't have time for prisoners now. In Sunrise Haven's data center, Hilda finished routing analog tones through the tiny gap in the jamming pattern. Her deck translated system statuses into a slow, pulsing code that any old hand at comms could read if they thought to look for it. On Caldera's spindle, a board signal officer scanning for anything beyond the jamming haze frowned as a faint, rhythmic series of spikes crawled across a sideband. What is this? She murmured. She ran it through a library of legacy analysis tools that had not been used in years. Text resolved, crude but clear. Borders, defending. Docked ship hostile. Clamps under station control. Request, support. Can hold limited time. Priority now. Possible larger op. She called a supervisor. Within minutes, Admiral Rafiq was reading the decoded message, his pulse quickening. They have already disabled jamming long enough to do this, he thought. With what? And who is we? Director Tamsin Calderas raised an eyebrow. This confirms only that an incident is underway, she said. It does not change the calculus. By the time we scramble a task group in transit, the event will be resolved one way or another. If we divert assets now, the Lumen Gate's perimeter thins. Rafiq knew she was technically correct. He also knew that someone on that frail ring had just trapped a pirate frigate and was now asking for the chance to do more. Patch me through, he told the comms officer. Use their own band. I want to speak to whoever is running this show. Back on Sunrise Haven, Gurinder's console beeped. A narrow, wobbly carrier wave threaded through the jamming, resolved into a human voice with compression artifacts. This is Admiral Rafiq Ben Yunez of the Terran Outreach Union Task Group at Caldera Spindle, it said. Who is in operational command on Sunrise Haven? Gurinder glanced at the list of people issuing orders and laughed once, incredulously. That's a very good question, he murmured. Then he opened a channel. This is Chief Gurinder Al-Taleb, Station Security, he said. Operational command is distributed. We are repelling boarders and have locked a pirate frigate to our dock. Repeat. Hostile vessel is clamped under our control. However, enemy still holds primary weapons and drive. He hesitated, then added, our residents are heavily engaged. Many have prior service records I suspect your files do not fully appreciate. In the background of the channel, Mabel's voice cut in. Dry. Tell him that if he's going to send help, he should send them with sensible boots, not those ridiculous glossy things they issue now. They squeak. Rafiq heard her. There was something about the timbre, the casual authority. May I speak with the architect of this clamp gambit? He asked. Agnieszka, still guiding manual overrides, grumbled when Gurinder looked her way, then took the mic. This is Agnieszka Kraghul, she said. We have their clamps, but their captain is as stubborn as I am. They are trying to tear themselves free. If they succeed, they leave with whoever they have grabbed. If they fail, we all share our air with vacuum. Rafiq leaned on the console. You are not making my choice easy, he said. We can dispatch a small, fast response, but it will arrive too late to affect your immediate fight. Larger fleets cannot realistically divert without leaving the Lumen Gate vulnerable to other threats. Our analysts believe this may be a coordinated distraction. Your analysts may be right, Agnieszka replied. One frigate does not lug high-end jammers out here alone. But consider this, Admiral. If this is part of something bigger, then letting this particular tooth escape intact will only sharpen it. He almost smiled. He had said similar things to superiors years ago. Our primary concern is the safety of the residents, Rafiq replied. I am one of the residents, she snapped softly. Let us worry about our safety. You worry about the pattern. Where did this ship come from, and why hit us now? You have access to far more intel. Use it. We'll keep your problem pinned down as long as we can. In the operations room, Ambassador Thalwin inclined its leafy mass. Admiral, it said, human elders have a habit of being inconveniently capable. I have read the historical reviews. It would be consistent with their species' pattern to achieve something unexpected here. Could we give them some latitude? Director Tamsin exhaled. We cannot base doctrine on folklore about human stubbornness, she said. Yet her gaze stayed locked on the crude schematic of Sunrise Haven and Razorwind intertwined. Give them latitude, she thought. If they fail, you will need something heavier than latitude to fix this. Aloud, she said, Very well. I will not oppose a limited authorization, but I want contingencies drawn up if this is indeed part of a larger plan. Admiral Rafiq turned back to the channel. Miss Kraghul, he said, this is not standard procedure, but neither is your situation. I authorize you and Chief Gurinder to take whatever immediate measures you deem necessary to neutralize the boarding action. I cannot promise reinforcements in time to help. I can promise that we are now treating this as potentially linked to the increased Kraghul interest in the Lumen Gate. Agnieszka's lips thinned. That's all we needed, she said. Permission to keep doing what we're doing. She cut the channel, not out of disrespect, but because every second on comms was a second she was not watching Razorwind's power grid. On the pirate frigate, Yelena and Jonah reached a junction where corridors split toward the bridge and the engine room. She consulted the schematic overlay Seraq's earlier maintenance logs had accidentally provided. Her eyes tracked the color codes. If we take the bridge, we have command, she thought. If we take engineering, we have leverage. Her memory supplied images of bridges lost under boarding, crews dying around her. Leverage had saved more lives than theatrics. Engineering, she said, and pivoted that way. They nearly collided with Seraq himself, rounding the corner. He skidded to a halt, eyes wide. For a second, there was a tableau. Two humans in mismatched armor and clothing, one with pockmarks on her jaw from an old blast, another with sweat-slicked hair, and Seraq, one hand still holding a datapad. Don't yell, Yelena said conversationally, rifle steady. You know how close the next guard is. I don't want to shoot you, but I won't hesitate if it keeps them from raising an alarm. Seraq took in their bearing. The way they moved, not like panicked civilians, but like people deeply familiar with confined spaces and violence. You're the station defenders, he realized. Old ones, veterans. Always nice to meet a fan, she replied. Are you going to make trouble for us? He hesitated. Months of enforced service, of watching the Kraghul take what they wanted, flashed behind his eyes. He thought of the lives on Sunrise Haven. He thought of the Marauders' larger plan that Karzo had bragged about in drunken moments. I can get you to engineering, he said. faster than you can find it on your own, and I can make sure the automatic lockdown does not trap you in the wrong compartment." Jonah bristled. He's a pirate, he thought, or at least working for them. But behind the thought was another. So am I. If I'm willing to leverage any advantage, even this. Yelena's gaze bored into Seraq. "Why?" she asked. "You know what they do to defectors." "I also know what they're about to do," he said, voice tight. "This raid is just logistics. They're staging something far worse at the Lumen Gate. The coopted derelicts, the mass drivers, the timed trajectories. They mean to turn the gate into a catapult." Images flicked through his mind. Battered hulks, stripped of non-essentials, loaded with fuel and basic thrusters, pointed at high-density population hubs. The gate as a magnifying lens for momentum. "I do not want to be part of that," he said. "If helping you here buys me even a chance of a different future, I will take the risk." Yelena believed him. It was not sentimentality. It was the way his shoulders held, not like a Kraghul bully, but like someone braced constantly against an internal storm. "Fine," she said. "You walk in front, not behind. Any false step, and I assume betrayal. Understood?" He nodded. They moved together. In Razorwind's engine room, glowing conduits arched overhead, feeding the main drive assembly. A handful of crew tended monitors, their attention more on power fluctuations from the clamps than on the door. Seraq stepped in first, barking in the Marauders' harsh tongue. "Captain's orders. Divert 50% of auxiliary to forward shields. We are taking heavier resistance than expected." The crew, trained to obey, turned to their consoles. For a moment, their backs were exposed. That was all Yelena needed. "Hands off!" she shouted in trade. "Now!" Half the pirates froze, surprised. The other half reached for weapons. Jonah fired, Yelena fired, and the brief skirmish ended with the engine room under human control. While Jonah secured prisoners with cable ties and improvised restraints, Seraq slid into the main console position. "Clamp integrity is under attack from your station side," he said, scanning data. "Someone is feeding false fault states into the system. Clever someone. But that works to our advantage if you want to keep this ship attached instead of blown free." He tapped sequences, isolating power feeds to the docking system and rerouting them through manual breakers he could access from here. "This way, if your people decide to vent us," he thought, "they will at least have to do it physically, not at the press of a button." He pinged the bridge, locking out certain controls. Karzo would see warning messages, but in the fog of battle, might not immediately grasp that someone below had taken his engine room. "Now," Yelena said, glancing at the drive core's status. "What's this about the Lumen Gate?" As he explained in quick, clipped phrases, the scope of the threat expanded in her mind like a bloom of fire. "So, this isn't just about hostages," she thought. "They're building a hammer, a big one." On Sunrise Haven, Hilda listened to the half-overheard fragments, then relayed them up the chain. Within an hour of the first breach, the boarding actions had turned from desperate defense to an uneasy stalemate. Pirates held a few inner nodes. Residents held key corridors, and, more importantly, access to Razorwind's critical systems through their improvised strike team. By 11:15 a.m., Gurinder had the first half-coherent summary ready for Admiral Rafiq. "Short version," he said, over a stabilizing channel. "We repelled most of their boarding teams. We control large swaths of the station. Through cooperation with the defector on their side, our people have seized Razorwind's engine room. Their captain still holds the bridge, but he is effectively landlocked, and we have acquired evidence that this raid is one arm of a coordinated operation to weaponize the Lumen Gate using derelict hulls as projectiles." Silence followed for a long breath. "You're telling me," Rafiq said slowly, "that a retirement habitat has not only fought off a major pirate frigate, but boarded and partially captured it, and now is feeding us strategic intelligence on a plot we were only half sure existed." Gurinder thought of Mabel organizing panicked residents into counterattack squads, of Agnieszka's fingers dancing over manual controls, of Yelena leading Jonah through a narrow umbilical with the expression of someone going to fetch milk not to steal a warship. "Yes, sir," he said. "That is exactly what I am telling you." In the operations room, Director Tamsin Calderas massaged her temples. This was becoming politically treacherous. If the outer stations could handle such threats without formal fleets, why would the Assembly approve her requests for more patrol budgets? On the other hand, if this patchwork defense failed, she would have to explain why she had not authorized heavier support. "We need a plan that covers both outcomes," she thought. "And we need a way to prevent the Lumen Gate from being turned into a cannon, no matter what happens to that ring." She called up a dormant file, an emergency procedure designed by an Osari focus group when the Lumen Gate had first been brought online. The procedure's nickname had been informal at first, then institutionalized, the Tamsin Gambit, after the director who had argued hardest for its inclusion, despite its brutality. Its essence was simple. In the event of a hostile attempt to push unregistered massive objects through the Lumen Gate, the gate stabilizers could be deliberately destabilized, collapsing the transit channel. Anything passing through at that moment would be disintegrated or scattered into untraceable debris. Collateral effects would be catastrophic. Transit lanes would be disrupted, possibly for months. Any friendly traffic unlucky enough to be mid-transfer would be torn apart. Safety protocols would normally prevent such a maneuver. The Gambit bypassed them. It was the nuclear option with better branding. "We cannot let the Kraghul have their way with the gate," she thought. "But if the only way to stop them requires accepting the deaths of however many innocents are caught in the crossfire." Her thoughts slid back to Sunrise Haven, to the voices she had heard, the casual competence. "They are buying us options," she realized. "If they push further, perhaps we will not need this." Aloud, she told Rafiq, "Begin preparing the Tamsin contingency, but we do not execute it without my direct authorization." "Understood," he replied, his jaw tightening. He despised the plan, but he despised the idea of millions dying more. Back on Sunrise Haven, lunch hour approached. The kitchen smelled of simmering broth and fresh bread. Food service staff argued about whether to continue cooking. Some residents, adrenaline ebbing, realized they were starving. Bodies old and young demanded fuel. Mabel limped into the galley, eyes scanning the scene. "Keep cooking," she told the head cook. "People fight better on a full belly. And if this goes wrong and we don't see dinner, we may as well have had one good meal." Her practical tone made the hypothetical seem faintly absurd, which calmed nerves more than any speech could. In Razorwind's hallway outside engineering, Yelena, Jonah, and Seraq conferred over a rough plan. "If we can reroute power from their main weapons and shields," Seraq said, "and lock the clamps from this side as well, the station won't have to hold the whole load alone. We can also engage limited thrust to keep the hull tension in safe parameters." "Do that," Yelena said. "Then we figure out how to convince your captain to stand down." She already suspected the answer. They couldn't. Pirates who built reputations on terror and speed rarely yielded gracefully. They fought until they were dead or no longer profitable. Or, she thought grimly, we don't convince him. We simply take the last thing he has. By 12 p.m., Razorwind was effectively trapped. Its main guns were powered down. Its engines could spin, but any attempt to tear free from the clamps would likely rip its own hull open, venting compartments into space. Karzo understood that belatedly, watching error after error cascade down his displays. "Engine room has gone quiet," one of his officers reported. "No response from the chief engineer." Karzo slammed a fist into the armrest. "Find out who we missed on that station," he snarled. "Somebody on that ring plays war better than half my lieutenants." He imagined the old, soft, fragile humans cowering, and it did not match the fierce resistance they had mounted. The cognitive dissonance enraged him. In a cell on Sunrise Haven, after the last boarding team surrendered, a captured Kraghul murmured to another, "We raided a hospice once." They cried and begged. These ones laughed. By the end of that first engagement, Sunrise Haven had done more than defend itself. It had taken a ship. The residents did not celebrate long. Once Razorwind's bridge crew had been flushed out through a combined push from Yelena's boarding team and a timed environmental hack from Hilda, once Karzo had been dragged in shackles into a reinforced compartment, the larger stakes took shape. In a makeshift briefing area that had once been a yoga studio, leaders of this impromptu defense gathered. Holoscreens showed schematics of Razorwind, data dumps from its logs, and a grainy projection of the Lumen Gate with labeled derelicts arranged around it like beads on a deadly necklace. Agnieszka leaned on the back of a chair, rubbing her wrists. Mabel sat with her cane laid across her knees. Yelena stood with arms folded. Hilda's deck glowed faintly at her side. Gurinder, Lena, Jonah, and Seraq completed the circle. Seraq glared nervously at Karzo's bloodied form in a corner, now gagged. "They've been dragging old hulks out of shallow gravity wells for months," Seraq said, "stripping them of anything valuable, then hitching them with salvaged thrusters. The plan is to push them through the Lumen Gate in quick succession with precise vectoring. The Osari technology stabilizes mass transits, but it was never meant for this. The kinetic energy transfer would be." He swallowed. "Bad," Jonah offered. "Catastrophic," Seraq replied. "If they aim them at major population centers, or even just at key industrial nodes, the impact yields would rival strategic bombardment." Mabel frowned at the projected orbits. "They'll need to stage near the gate," she said. "Lots of mass, lots of coordination. That's their vulnerable moment. They're building a stack of plates and hoping no one kicks the table. And we have a plate we just stole," Agnieszka added, gesturing at Razorwind's schematic. "And a crew. And, now, a reason." Lena shifted uncomfortably. "You're not actually considering... what? Flying that thing straight into the middle of whatever they're building?" "Yes," Yelena said, without hesitation. "Because right now, the only ones close enough to make any difference quickly are sitting in this room." Gurinder winced. "With respect," he said, "none of you have passed a fleet physical in 2 decades. Neither have most of the Kraghul," Mabel said dryly. "They don't exactly encourage aerobic fitness in between pillaging and drinking." She looked at the projection again, then traced a path with her cane. "We have something they don't," she said. "They see us as spent forces. They don't expect resistance from retirement rings and medical bays. We can ride that ignorance right into their heart." Hilda rumpled her hair. "And I have a ship full of systems I already halfway understand," she mused. "Their engineers were not subtle. I can probably bend Razorwind's network into shapes they've never imagined. Blend standard Marauder protocols with some of my old failsafe routines." Seraq nodded slowly. "With your permission," he said, "I can help. If I try to go back to them, I am dead anyway. This way, at least I point my knowledge at something I can live with." Gurinder glanced between them, torn between regulations and reality. "I should be putting you all back into bed and waiting for fleet units," he thought. "But fleet units are days away. The Lumen Gate's imaginary schedule cares nothing for how fast we wish we could move." Aloud, he said, "If we do this, we do it under a clear outline. No one steps aboard that frigate without knowing their chances of coming back. No one is conscripted. Volunteers only." Mabel's eyes twinkled. "You'll have more volunteers than bunks," she said. "Half this ring has been waiting for something more exciting than shuffleboard." Within an afternoon, the corridor outside Razorwind's main airlock resembled a recruiting fair. Residents lined up, some in uniform jackets taken out of storage and brushed off, others in simple clothing. Gurinder and Lena moved along the line, checking vitals, turning some away gently. "You have a spinal implant that's incompatible with their artificial gravity," Lena told one former pilot. "I'm sorry." He scowled, then nodded resignedly. "I'll help from here, then," he said. "Comms? Maybe." "You'd be perfect for that," she replied, meaning it. By evening, Sunrise Haven's skeleton staff had become the nucleus of a new crew. Razorwind's old name was still stenciled on its hull. No one bothered to repaint it. Its pirate transponder codes remained. Those would be their camouflage. When Admiral Rafiq received the formal proposal Operation Hearthshield, they had dubbed it with Mabel's flair for slogans. He reread it 3 times. "You want to crew the captured frigate with retirees and station staff," he said over comms, "and use it to infiltrate the Kraghul staging area around the Lumen Gate, gathering intelligence and sabotaging from within." "That is the gist," Mabel replied. "We're not asking you to sign a liability waiver. We know what we're getting into. but we are also the only ones close enough to hit them before they finish stacking their plates. Ambassador Thalawun's leaves fluttered with almost audible shock. This is irregular, it said, but not necessarily unwise. Director Tamsin pursed her lips. If we authorize this and they fail, the Kraghul will tighten security, making any subsequent approach more costly, she said. If we do not authorize it, and they might have succeeded, we will have turned away the one unpredictable variable we had. Human unpredictability, Thalawun murmured. A constant of the universe, according to some papers. In the end, pragmatism and a whisper of admiration carried the day. Rafiq gave his conditional approval. I will dispatch scout elements to trail you as closely as possible, he said. If you find a way to disrupt their plan, take it. If the risk becomes intolerable, you are authorized to disengage and run. He knew they would not. He said it anyway. As Razorwind's engines rumbled to life under new management, Sunrise Haven's ring felt oddly quiet. Those who had volunteered filed aboard. Those who remained behind watched through windows. Lena walked the boarding line with a medkit, making last checks. She stopped beside Yelena. Blood pressure? She asked. High, as always before something interesting, Yelena replied. It will stabilize once re-entry into danger is complete. Lena almost smiled. Seraq stood at the base of the ramp, palms damp. He had changed into a plain coverall, stripped of Marauder insignia. His future hinged on the next days. He thought of all the small compromises he had made in service to Karzo's crew and felt a sour desire to balance the scales. Mabel limped aboard, cane tapping the deck. She had a portable console slung over one shoulder, its screen already filled with supply lists for their little expedition. Last chance to back out, Gurinder murmured to Agnieszka as they crossed the threshold. Last chance was decades ago, she replied. We're just following through now. Razorwind detached from Sunrise Haven with a muted shudder. Its profile resolved full against the gas giant's pastel storms, then slid away toward the Lumen Gate, its transponder chirping its identity, as if nothing had changed. Under Seraq's and Hilda's joint guidance, the frigate followed Marauder entry protocols as it neared the rendezvous volume. Kraghul traffic control scanned it, challenged it, and eventually accepted its story. Delayed by a spirited defense at some backwater ring, but mostly intact, hostages secured. On Razorwind's bridge, the chairs were too large for most human bodies, designed to cradle broader frames. Yelena made do, perching on the edge, rifle propped against the console. Agnieszka sat at an engineering substation. Hilda occupied a dedicated systems nook, cord snaking from her deck into Razorwind's spine. Seraq sat at navigation, fingers flying across alien controls with familiar ease. We are entering their assembly field, he said. Look! Space ahead blossomed with metal. Derelict hulls of all shapes and sizes hung in loose formation. Old freighters, gutted cruisers, smuggling barges. Some still bore faded corporate logos. Others were stripped to bare frames. Thrusters had been welded onto them like barnacles. Tethers and cable bundles stretched between them, converging on a central cluster, where a massive Kraghul flagship floated, its armored plates bristling with weapons. Beyond this ugly constellation, the Lumen Gate's serene geometry glowed, its segments humming in patient power. Mabel whistled softly. They've been busy, she said. Seraq's throat tightened. If they fire those in sequence through the gate, he thought, no emergency plan short of full collapse will save the targets. Over comms, Kraghul officers barked orders, assigning Razorwind a berth near the outer perimeter. Razorwind, you are late, a harsh voice snapped. Report on hostages and casualties. Yelena motioned for silence. Seraq answered in the Marauders' language, affecting surly fatigue. Resistance heavier than expected, he said. Our boarding teams suffered minor losses. Hostages secured. Systems damaged but operational. Dock and stand by for distribution of spoils, came the reply. Flagship Command has new orders. All units to hold at current stations until transit window opens. You are 5 positions from the front of the sequence. Seraq suppressed a shudder. 5 derelicts ahead of them in the queue. 5 shots before their turn to plunge through the gate if they stayed in line. After docking to a skeletal anchoring arm, Razorwind's hull shuddered as external clamps locked it into the murderous lattice. Inside, Operation Hearthshield began. Mabel hijacked low-level logistics channels, injecting false requisitions. She ordered coolant shipments redirected from certain thruster clusters to others, citing spurious leaks. Hilda inserted subtle delays into timing signals, stretching coordination intervals by fractions of a second that would accumulate at scale. Seraq sent maintenance queries to nearby ships, asking them to confirm tether tension and fuel levels, sowing just enough confusion that a few captains paused to triple-check their fittings. Agnieszka used Razorwind's humble sensor suite to take detailed readings of the tethers connecting the derelict mass to the flagship. Against this purely pragmatic analysis, she could not help overlaying the human toll those metal chunks represented. Someone lived in that freighter, she thought, noting a still visible family crest. They hung curtains in its windows. Now it's a bullet. Yelena and Jonah oversaw internal drills. They had brought only a limited boarding team. There would be no full-scale pirate-style assault on the armada around them. Their strength lay in targeted sabotage and timing. On Caldera Spindle, Admiral Rafiq watched incoming data from Razorwind with growing alarm. The visualizations, even in simplified form, clearly showed an improvised but effective weapon array. Director Tamsin Calderas authorized the first stage of the Tamsin Gambit, warming up the Lumen Gate's failsafes, bringing dormant code modules online, in case she needed to push the red button. "We stand on a cliff's edge," she told Thaluin quietly. "Either those people on Razorwind nudge us back, or I may have to kick the rock slide myself." Thaluin's leaves darkened. "Humans have a saying," it replied. "Between a rock and a hard place, they have a habit of becoming the harder place." Time flowed with deceptive slowness as the Kraghul armada prepared. Each derelict's thrusters were brought up from standby. Tether winches tested their tension. Orientation thrusters fired, nudging hunks of metal into precise alignment with the Lumen Gate's shimmering aperture. Inside Razorwind, tension coiled. The retirees felt it as a familiar ache. The staff felt it as a new, hot knot. At 3 p.m., a suspicious Kraghul controller flagged Razorwind's odd power fluctuations. The lag between their queries and Seraq's carefully crafted answers grew thin. "What's our plan when they figure out we're not on their side?" Lena asked. Everyone looked at Agnieszka. "We punch them in the nose," she said, "and then we pull their teeth out." Mabel sighed. "In other words, we do what we always do. Improvisation with a side of chaos." Her eyes gleamed. "Fine. Here's how we turn a stack of plates into a toppled table." She outlined it quickly. They could not hope to fully disengage the derelict mass from the Lumen Gate's influence, but they could cut enough tethers and misalign enough thrusters that the trajectory, at the last moment, would veer. "Into their flagship," she concluded, tapping its bulky icon. "Not perfectly. We're not magicians, but enough to cripple their central node, take away command, and the rest of their pack will flail." "And Razorwind?" Jonah asked. Agnieszka met his gaze steadily. "Razorwind will ride the leading edge," she said. "We use her engines as a shepherd, nudging the debris cloud, never quite letting it spin free. If we misjudge, we get ground into paste between colliding hulls. If we judge well, we skim clear by the width of a hair." Those are not encouraging odds, Seraq thought. But aloud he said, "I can tune the thrust vectors. I've ridden worse. Maybe not with so many lives, depending on my feel for turbulence, but there is a first time for everything." Hilda cracked her knuckles. "I will make sure their attempt to seize our systems when things kick off runs straight into a wall," she said. "They think everyone fights on their network. I kept a typewriter for a reason." At 3:18 p.m., the suspicious Kraghul controller finally transmitted a priority query demanding Razorwind's authentication under a deep code cipher. It was old, but not old enough that Hilda had cracked it beforehand. "Here we go," she murmured. Instead of answering, she let the query in, then fed it nonsense that would briefly confuse the command net. For a tiny sliver of time, Razorwind became a ghost between categories. Not friend, not foe, simply unknown. It was enough. "Now," Mabel said. External camera feeds showed Yelena's small team launching thruster packs out onto the connecting gantries. They clung to the skeletal arms connecting derelicts, their boots' maglocks thudding onto rusted metal. Microgravity made their movements jerky but swift. They had trained for this the last lost day, practicing cranking emergency valves and cutting control lines with simple tools. Yelena grinned into her helmet. "This feels like being young again," she thought, then corrected herself. "No, this feels like remembering that young was just a costume we wore over who we really were." They set demolition charges where tethers met hull. Not big blasts, just enough to sever cabling and jam winches. They used old-fashioned cutting torches, sparking in the dark, and even, in one case, a hand-cranked wrench to force a jammed coupler off its setting. Inside Razorwind, Seraq watched tension indicators. "We're at a tipping point," he said. "If we fire now, we can send a stress wave along the tether network that will amplify the misalignments. But once they realize what we're doing, they'll try to pull us off the network." Hilda interjected. "Let them try." On cue, a Kraghul override slammed into Razorwind's systems, attempting to wrest control of its engines and thrusters. Hilda's offline deck intercepted the request, translated it, and sent back a looped denial. "Subsystem unavailable. Kraghul control logic was not used to such blunt refusal." It hammered again, triggering fallback routines that only dug it deeper into the maze Hilda had laid. "They're blind on us," she thought. Now, Seraq opened Razorwind's main drive like a blood vessel. Engines roared. Thrust surged along carefully calculated vectors. The ship's hull groaned as the attached tethers strained, their slack eaten in an instant. Around them, derelicts shuddered, their orientations wobbling just a degree or two off perfect alignment. It was enough to send the whole massive cluster into a slow, majestic procession. On the Kraghul flagship, alarms erupted. Commodore Vorix Cal, whose name Razorwind's crew had heard only in curses before, now watched the plot twist. "Razorwind has gone rogue," a subordinate shouted. "They are injecting thrust into the tether grid. Mass alignment compromised." Vorix's eyes narrowed. "Cut them loose," he ordered. "Release their clamps. I will not have one disobedient hound topple my hunt." Commands rippled out. Release sequences triggered along Razorwind's docking arms. On Razorwind, the clamps blew. The ship lurched, flung from its anchoring position into a tumbling arc along the derelict cluster's rim. Seraq fought the control yoke, swearing in his native tongue and in trade. "Hold together," Agnieszka prayed to the hull. Just a little longer. The derelicts, now partially untethered and pushed off-center, began to drift not straight toward the Lumen Gate aperture, but along a skewed path toward the mass of the Kraghul flagship. On Caldera's spindle, Director Tamsin watched the trajectory revision render in real time. Her finger hovered over the Tamsin gambit's final confirmation. If they miss, she thought, those derelicts could still hit the gate or scatter into civilian lanes. If I trigger collapse now, I destroy the entire cluster before we know if their gambit works. Admiral Rafiq, sensing her hesitation, spoke. "Look at the vector," he said. "They are not aiming at the gate. They are aiming at the flagship. They are also within the kill volume of the gate's stabilizer collapse," she replied. "If we do this now, we kill them as surely as the pirates." We might anyway, he thought. We send people to die all the time by our decisions. But this decision feels different. Ambassador Thaluan's tendrils curled. "If you trust any human instinct," it said slowly, "trust theirs now. They have seen the enemy up close. To undo their work at this juncture would be an error beyond numbers." Numbers paraded in Tamsin's mind. Projected deaths if the Kraghul plan succeeded. Projected losses if the gate collapsed. Unknowns on both sides. She removed her finger from the confirmation pad. "Hold," she said tightly. "We do nothing until impact." On Razorwind, alarms howled. Non-critical bulkheads buckled under stress. One of the reinforcing braces Agnieszka had installed groaned, twisted, then held. "We're riding the wave," Seraq announced through gritted teeth. "If we overthrust, we tumble. If we underthrust, we lose steering and get pulverized." Functional grav plating flickered. Crew staggered, weightless for heartbeats at a time. Mabel clung to a console, eyes glued to her improvise supply readout. If the coolant in Line B blows, she thought, the drive overheats and we explode. If the oxygen reserve in Tank 3 ruptures, we vent a third of our air. If. It always comes down to if, and what you do when it happens. On an external gantry, Yelena and her team clung to handholds as the derelict they were attached to rolled slowly, giving them an unwanted panoramic view. The flagship's looming bulk rotated into view ahead. She could almost see Kraghul crew scurrying along its spine, manning emergency stations, futilely trying to realign defensive batteries to shoot apart a tide of junk. Too slow, she thought, teeth bared. As the derelict cluster's path intersected the flagship's, Vorax Cal realized the inevitability. "Cut all remaining tethers," he roared. "Fire thrusters full reverse. Divert all power to lateral vectors." Engines flared. The flagship began to move. It could not move fast enough. At 3:26 p.m., under the watchful, horrified, and awestruck eyes of people on Sunrise Haven, Caldera's Spindle, and a dozen civilian outposts linked in, the mass of derelicts slammed into the Kraghul flagship. The collision unfolded in slow grace on distant sensors and in bone-jarring violence aboard Razorwind. Hulls buckled. Energy discharges spit plasma into space as ruptured reactors vented their dying flares. The flagship's rear third folded like thin tin under the combined momentum, its internal compartments imploding, ejecting debris. Shockwaves shook Razorwind. Structural beams sang under the strain. A support strut in engineering snapped with a sound like a gunshot. Agnieszka threw herself at a manual throttle, forcing bleed valves open to vent excess drive pressure into space instead of back into the core. If I misjudge this, she thought, the backblast will cook us. She did not misjudge. Gases screamed out into the void, giving Razorwind a last sideways shove that carried it just clear of a spinning chunk of hull the size of a building. Yelena's team ducked instinctively as a torn section of derelict core spiraled past, trailing cables like snapped tendons. Micro-debris pinged off their suits, leaving white scars. In Razorwind's sickbay turned temporary command spillover, Lena braced herself against a cabinet, eyes squeezed shut against the motion sickness threatening to overwhelm her. "Do not throw up here," she told herself. "There are wounded who will need you in seconds. This is not about you." On Caldera's Spindle, a hush fell across the operations room. The plot on the main display flickered, recalibrated, and showed the Kraghul flagship as a blooming cloud of expanding wreckage. Smaller markers pirate ships that had been arrayed around it spun in disarray, their organized formation shattered. Director Tamsin exhaled a breath she had not realized she was holding. "I almost killed them," she admitted to herself, "by trying to save them." Aloud, she said, "Admiral, dispatch every available rescue and enforcement vessel. I want Kraghul survivors pulled from pods and hulls. I want this debris field cataloged. And, above all, I want our people on that stolen frigate found and brought home." Admiral Rafiq's shoulders eased. He nodded to his staff. "You heard the director," he said. "Move." Out in the outer belt corridor, the remaining Kraghul Marauder ships had decisions to make. Some chose to flee, their captains deciding that Vorax's grand plan was not worth dying for. Others tried to counterattack, only to find themselves facing a stiffening perimeter of coalition response vessels, now arriving in force, emboldened by the collapse of the central threat. A few, their crews composed of coerced laborers like Seraq had been, simply powered down and transmitted surrender. On Razorwind, emergency crews, old hands and fresh staff side by side moved through smoke-filled corridors, sealing breaches, tapping on bulkheads to see which still rang true and which were dead void. Agnieszka's respirator hissed as she ducked under a dangling cable. "Status of the main drive?" she shouted down to Seraq, who sat slumped at the console, hands still clutching the controls. "Alive," he croaked. "Barely. Like me. Like all of us," she thought. They had done it. They had crippled the core of the Kraghul plan. The Lumen Gate still glowed, intact, not forced into a deadly collapse. The derelict weapons lay in mangled ruin, instead of streaking through etheric corridors toward unsuspecting worlds. Razorwind, scorched and battered, drifted amid the wreckage, Its once proud pirate lines looked more like a survivor of a natural disaster than a raider. Distant lights approached, the honest blue-white burns of coalition rescue ships. One vessel in particular cut a singular profile that made Seraq's throat tighten, a Terran Outreach Union cruiser under Admiral Rafiq's own command. In Sunrise Haven's viewing lounge, those who had stayed behind crowded the windows, watching the faint sparkle of distant explosions and then the slow approach of friendly silhouettes. Their defense station had become control center, and now, gradually, it became a reunion hall. Rescue craft docked with Razorwind. Airlocks cycled. Boarding ramps extended. Admiral Rafiq himself stepped across. Not in full dress uniform, he hadn't had time to change, but in duty black stained with coffee and tension. He looked around Razorwind's scarred interior and saw tired faces, older than most of his command staff, streaked with soot, eyes clear. Mabel greeted him with a slight bow. "You're late," she said, not unkindly. He laughed. The sound edged with disbelief. "I see you managed without us," he replied. Then his gaze sobered. "This should never have fallen on your shoulders, but I am very, very grateful that when it did, you were ready. Retirement," Agnieszka said from behind him, "was always a provisional concept." Lena, exhausted, sat on a crate, watching medics from Rafiq's crew move through, helping transfer wounded. She overheard snippets of conversation as naval officers processed the scene. "They did this?" one whispered incredulously. "Yes," another replied. "They did." News traveled quickly. Within days, stories of Sunrise Haven's stand and Razorwind's wild run through the derelict cluster floated through civilian networks and military channels alike. Some accounts exaggerated details. Others understated them. The core fact remained. A group of humans that most of the galaxy had politely written off had changed the course of a major threat. The Terran Outreach Union moved to formalize that reality. In a ceremony held not in some distant capital but on Caldera's spindle, in a hall hastily decorated with banners bearing both coalition insignia and the simple emblem of Sunrise Haven's ring, Admiral Rafiq presented commendations. He handed Mabel a small metal disc on a ribbon. "For strategic initiative under extraordinary circumstances," he said. She rolled her eyes. "You could have just sent better coffee," she replied. But she wore the ribbon anyway. Agnieszka declined a medal. "Give me parts instead," she said. "I have thoughts about your ship designs that your engineers will not like to hear." Rafiq grinned. "I suspect they will need to hear them anyway," he said. Director Tamsin Calderas approached the podium last. She was not popular among line officers, but she was very good at reading mood. "We have relied too long on the idea that duty has an expiration date," she told the assembled. "That after a certain point, we can safely file people away under retired and move on. Sunrise Haven has demonstrated that this is not just wasteful, but dangerous. The experience we thought of as archived turned out to be our best live asset." She announced the creation of the Hearthshield Corps, a network of retired personnel across Coalition space who would be consulted in crises, invited to advise on contingency planning, and, if they chose, kept within reach of the levers if things went wrong. The idea spread faster than she anticipated. Virid elders volunteered to share their long memories. Osari, whose crystalline mind stored centuries of policy, dusted off old crisis protocols for re-evaluation. Humans, of course, signed up in droves. On Sunrise Haven itself, life resumed with its familiar rhythms, layered now with new responsibilities. The ring received structural upgrades. Its emergency systems were rewired with Hilda's blessings, not in spite of them. Analog consoles appeared alongside sleek new interfaces. Maintenance drones zipped along rails with slightly more aggressive sensor payloads, courtesy of Agnieszka. In the kitchen, Mabel argued with procurement officers about the ratio of comfort food to healthy options, citing morale research she had lived long before statisticians had formalized it. Yelena led drills in the walking track, now officially designated as a tactical mobility lane in station records. Jonah assisted, no longer the only instructor, but still the one most amazed. Lena ran a small clinic that doubled as a training lab. She taught younger medics how to improvise with limited supplies, using techniques her elderly patients had devised in older wars. Seraq, granted asylum and a provisional advisory role, split his time between Razorwind, now undergoing a messy conversion into a coalition-aligned patrol vessel, and Sunrise Haven, where he found, to his surprise, that he liked talking to people who treated him as something other than a resource. On a distant, hidden node of Kraghul space, Commodore Vorix Cal watched intercepted recordings of the battle. His flagship was gone. Many of his lieutenants were dead or scattered. Yet his ambition burned hotter. He replayed a segment showing Razorwind's improbable slide through the derelict chaos, frame by frame. These are the ones the humans considered expendable, he mused. The surplus, the old. And still they fought like predators, not prey. His lips curled. We have been measuring their species incorrectly, he thought. We count their fleets, their planets. We have not counted their stubbornness. He began to plan anew, this time not assuming any human population, however peaceful, could be safely ignored. On Sunrise Haven, Mabel sat in the viewing lounge, cane across her knees, watching small specks of light coil around the Lumen Gate. Traffic had resumed. Trade flowed. Somewhere out there, people were living their lives, unaware how close they had come to seeing those lights turn into falling stars. She did not mind that they did not know. The universe did not owe anyone awareness of every danger averted. It owed them the chance to keep waking up to ordinary problems. Agnieszka joined her, mug of tea in hand. Engineers from Calderas came by this morning, Agnieszka said. They were very disappointed when I told them I would not be joining their design board permanently. You like your little drones too much, Mabel replied. I like my little ring, Agnieszka corrected. And the noises it makes when something's wrong. That's my music now. They sat in companionable silence for a while. We did well, Mabel said at last. Yes, Agnieszka agreed. We did. And next time someone thinks a ring full of old humans is an easy target, Agnieszka's smile was thin and fierce. Let them try, she said. We're not done yet.